So Sony are releasing two new cameras. We've got the a7C Mark II, a follow-up to the a7C that came out in 2020, and the a7C-R, which is a higher resolution kind of version of this. We're going to have a separate review on that, but in this video, we're going to be talking all about the a7C Mark II. Now, like I say, the original a7C came out in 2020, and it was broadly speaking a lot like an a7 III, but in a smaller, lighter, more compact body. And that made it really nice. That made it a great travel option. It felt a bit like an APS-C camera in the hands, but with the performance of a full frame camera, which is such an awesome setup, especially for things like travel or street or anything where you want to have a pretty compact system, maybe with one lens, maybe a zoom lens. I mean, this is the 28-60. You could use something like a 16-35, whatever it might be. It's a great camera to just have in your bag for whatever you want to be shooting, but still able to get some really lovely results. And now with the a7C Mark II, Sony are really bringing that C range of cameras up to the kind of modern standard, I guess, of their current range. So it's a lot more like an a7 IV, but with other bits added in as well. You've got some stuff in there from the a7R5, including AI stuff with the autofocus. You've got some stuff in there from the ZVE1, which is really cool. This is definitely a hybrid camera, so video and photo. And since video is becoming more and more essential in cameras, I think that's good to see. But you've got some really good performance in here in, again, a very, very nice, small, compact, lightweight body. Now, before we get into the key spec, I do want to say I've got this in the silver. It does come in black as well, but I really like the look of this camera. I actually think it's just a nice thing to have out and about with you. And in terms of how cameras look, I don't mind this one at all. I don't mind this lovely silver top. And I've been using this for about 3 days, and I am absolutely in love with the size of this. Still getting that full frame power, still getting some really nice results from it. Oh, but the size. I was a little worried I wouldn't like the viewfinder and the kind of size of it and where it is, but no, I'm very much into this camera. So let's get a little bit into the key spec of the camera, what it can do. Let's start with kind of the photographic side of things. 33 megapixels, that's the sensor in there. So that's actually pretty decent. That gives you quite a lot of room to crop if you want to. There's going to be a lot of detail left in that image if you want to crop in, reframe it, whatever it might be like that. You've got a new Bions processor in here as well, which is much faster and allows the camera to do things like a lot of the AI subject recognition, all that kind of stuff that we've seen in stuff like the a7R5, the ZVE1. That also means it has better subject recognition, so eye, head, face, and human pose as well, which is something we've seen in the latest Sony cameras, which is pretty cool. And along with that better autofocus is stuff like the auto framing feature that we've seen in cameras like the ZVE1 and even the a6700 recently. So you can probably expect that, I'm guessing, to see that in most Sony cameras going forwards. But it's cool to see it in this. I mean, it's a nice feature, especially if you're out, creating content, especially by yourself as well. It allows you to get that slightly more dynamic look to your video shots. So if you wanted to take this traveling, that'd be an interesting way to be able to film yourself. The image stabilization is improved as well. So we're up to 7 stops, which is pretty impressive, actually. And I've got to say, I used to be fairly critical of Sony for the image stabilization. I used to say things like, there's better image stabilization out there. This isn't the best we've ever seen. It's not bad. But actually, it is. It's getting really good. And in this camera, again, it's really good. And that's quite impressive, especially in a small body like this. It means handheld video is definitely very achievable, which I think is a great thing to be able to do with a camera like this. Because like I say, if you are taking this traveling, or you're an enthusiast just taking it out and about, or it's the kind of camera you might just put in your bag for kind of any occasion. If you're going out with friends, if you're going up, on a nice hike or something, it's a great one to take with you. And if you want to shoot some handheld video, not have to worry about a gimbal and all that kind of stuff, which would, to be fair, ruin the kind of point of the size of this, that's a really good thing to have in there. Of course, your active mode as well, which really allows you to kind of step that up even further and get some great handheld video shots. And then video is massively improved as well from the a7C. Now that's no surprise because we've seen massive advancements with video with Sony over the last sort of couple of years, pretty much since the a7C came out. So this can shoot up to 4K 60 frames a second. I will talk about that in a little bit, and 422 10-bit as well. And there's a bunch of other stuff in there, which is great, like the S-Cinetone, S-Log3, HLG. There's a lot of things you can actually do with this when it comes to video. And like I say, we'll talk about the ins and outs on what I like and what I don't like about that a little bit later in the video. First up though, the images. I think that they genuinely look fantastic. There's a lot of different ways you can shoot. Of course, generally I would always shoot in RAW, but if you want to use things like creative looks and stuff like that, you can absolutely do that in camera. The detail is great, 33 megapixels, like I mentioned before, gives you lots of room to crop if you want to as well. Lots of detail there to print very, very big or whatever you might want to do. But the detail is great. And actually, it was interesting to test this out in slightly lower light conditions. And it does look really good. There's not loads of noise. It just performs very, very well. I also think the colors look really good, whether it's skin tones, whether it's a sunset, whatever it might be. The colors are really nice, actually. And the camera lends itself quite naturally to a few different ways of shooting. So landscape, absolutely. 33 megapixels is going to be great for landscape, but portraiture as well. There is something to be said about a slightly smaller camera like this not feeling so intimidating if you're taking portraits of someone who isn't maybe so used to having their portrait taken, if they're not a professional model. If you're taking pictures of friends or something like that, this is definitely a less intimidating thing to have kind of up in their face. And then of course, street photography as well. This is going to be great for that kind of thing because it is quite subtle, quite small, easy to take around with you without a massive camera bag. And again, it's not going to be up in people's faces with some massive camera. Autofocus is something which unsurprisingly just works exceptionally well. There's not much you can really even say about Sony autofocus at this point, other than that it is just some of the best autofocus you'll see in a camera. And that's the case here. It's very, very quick. 94% coverage. That's not really a stat that really comes up very often anymore, but 94% coverage on the sensor. Of course, like I mentioned before, eye autofocus, face, head, human pose, which is really good as well, actually, if you're not shooting someone maybe from the front, maybe you're shooting them from the side. It just works extremely well with the subject recognition. And that goes over then to animals, birds, planes, trains, cars, bikes, insects. You're really at a stage with a camera like this where you don't have to think too much about the focusing because the camera is going to handle a lot of that work for you. And if you do want to take advantage of the speed as well, this can shoot up to 10 frames a second, which while not a crazy speed, is more than enough, I think, for most things that you're going to be doing with this camera. 10 frames a second is absolutely fine. Now, this is a hybrid camera, absolutely, and you can see that actually with the switch by the kind of mode dial. Now, that switches directly from stills to video and then to S&Q as well. Let's talk a little bit about the video on this camera, because like I say, definitely a hybrid camera through and through, 4K up to 60 frames a second. That's nice, and that's what I wanted to touch on initially. 4K 60 is absolutely fine. That is a nice kind of frame rate to shoot at. I would have loved to have seen 4K 120 in a camera like this. I think that would have been really something special, but it's fine. 4K 60 is fine. And to be honest, I mean, for me personally, I'm trying to move away from relying too much on 120 frames a second, but 4K 60 still allows you some nice slow motion at 4K. There is a little bit of a crop at 4K 60, so it's a Super 35, so a little bit like an APS-C crop, but that's one of those things that's either an advantage or a disadvantage depending on what kind of footage you want to get. I've used a crop like that in the past to actually get more reach out of a lens, which has been really helpful, but of course, if you want to shoot really wide, you're not going to be able to shoot quite as wide at 4K 60, but 4K 30, no problem. That's oversampling from 7K as well, so it looks really, really good. And there's no cropping or pixel binning or anything like that at all. You have then also got full HD, 120 frames a second. So if you do want that super slow motion, you can do that at full HD, which is fine, to be honest. I mean, it is nice to do it at 4K, but it's fine. And of course, 422 10-bit all intra as well, which is important because, you know, we've come to expect that now from Sony cameras, and that had to be in here, to be honest. The days of it just being 420 8-bit are gone, which is good because, you know, 422 10-bit allows you more room to color grade, more kind of flexibility when it comes to kind of the post-production side of things, which I think is great. But if you don't want to do any of that, you still got things like creative looks. So in camera, you can kind of essentially get the footage looking the way you want it. So if you want to just be shooting and not worrying too much about color grading later, that's something you can do, which I think is really cool. Otherwise, you've got some nice tools available to you, S-Log3, S-Cinetone, HLG as well. So it's a pretty capable video system as well as photography. And then you've got the connections that you would probably expect, especially when you're talking about video like that. So microphone, headphone, it's USB-C as well, which is great. Now, it is worth mentioning there's no charger or USB-C cable in the box, but I think probably most of us surely have a USB-C cable around now. So while it would have been nice to have one in the box, it's not the end of the world, is it? And then you can just charge through the USB-C cable, which is, to be honest, a lot of the time way more convenient than actually having a separate charger, take the battery out, put it in that and do all that kind of stuff, forget the battery when you go out. Believe me, I've been there. Now, it is one SD card slot actually in the camera, which is not surprising, if I'm honest with you, because this is definitely, it doesn't feel like a professional camera, right? Where you would expect two card slots. It feels a little bit more like a very good enthusiast camera. Someone who probably isn't going to mind so much that there's only one SD card slot. I don't mind that much, right? It's always nice to see 2 card slots, but I get why there's one. It's also a very compact system, so it probably saves space just having the 1 card slot in the side here, but it is worth just being aware of. Otherwise, the actual design of the camera, considering how small it is, it's super comfortable to hold. I have reasonably big hands, and I've got to be honest, I never ever had a problem holding this. It's got a reasonably deep grip, or certainly deep enough for the size of this, and your hands fit around it really nicely. It's a comfortable feel as well, feels, you know, well made. And the buttons are actually a pretty good size and very ergonomic in their placement. You haven't got a joystick, which I always love a joystick on a camera. I get why there's not one because it's quite small. That's just kind of one of those things. You can't have it be small and still have all of the buttons and joysticks and all that kind of stuff that you would expect on a bigger camera. Just physics doesn't work that way, I guess. But otherwise, you still have a nice kind of array of different controls, and it's easy to actually be using this. I felt right at home with this camera very, very quickly from starting to use it. Flip out screen as well, which I love to see that, especially I think on a camera like this, I think it works really well. And then a nice OLED EVF as well, just on the side here. So not a central EVF. And like I say, I thought I might not like that very much, but actually it's pretty nice. And it's also worth mentioning it's a digital audio interface as well. So it'll work with some of the newer microphones, which is so easy to use. So if you wanted to use this for vlogging, you know, a trip, something like that, you pop one of the new shotgun mics just on the top. You don't have to plug anything in. You just pop it on there. It works. Super easy. I really like this. I liked the A7C, and I love that the A7C II is kind of brought up to date with what you'd expect from a current Sony camera. Do I wish it had things like 4K 120? Yes, that would be fantastic. But for a compact, lightweight Sony camera that feels like it's part of the kind of current gen of Sony cameras, I think this is really, really nice. And it doesn't hurt that it looks great as well. You can check out this along with the A7CR and the 16-35 f2.8 G Master Mark II lens, which were all announced today. Over on our website, there's links down in the description, parkcameras.com, but I'll pop the links down there. Super easy to go and check that out. Pricing, full spec, all of that fun stuff. Don't forget to like and subscribe as well, because there's new content all the time. I will see you next time. But until then, as always, thanks for watching.